We are now looking at simplifying fractions, which is lesson 4.3. We're mostly going to be looking at what's called our monomial fractions. The key thing for our algebraic or monomial fractions when you talk about them is that a fraction that's algebraic is going to be having variables in the fraction. So a fraction with variables and numbers is the key thing. A fraction with variables and numbers. You're going to be asked to do some simplifying of those. You're going to see the simplest form of a fraction, that definition on the next page. So while we're on this page of your notes in 4.3, let's write down how do you simplify an algebraic fraction. It's a lot like simplifying fractions. The first thing you want to do is write out the factors. So we're going to write our factors. And sometimes you're going to recognize some of these, so you may not need to always write out all your factors in both the numerator and the denominator. So in both your numerator, which is your number on the top, and your denominator. Once you have done this, and you've written these two out as with all your factors, you then want to divide by the common factors. So we're going to talk about dividing by our common factors. And remember, when you divide, you're simply just replacing it with a 1, and then you will be asked to simplify. Now, there's one more word that we kind of need to look at for our definitions, and that is equivalent fraction. So here's your definition for simplest form. A fraction whose numerator and denominator have the greatest common factor of only 1. And equivalent fractions are fractions that represent the same number when they're in simplest form. So what I would like you to do is write example 1. And for example 1, the only thing you really need to write down is example 1. You're going to put down 8/12. And we want to find two fractions that are equivalent. So we want to write two fractions that are equivalent to this. Now, you're going to see on the next page, one way of doing that is simply multiply the numbers by the same number, both numerator and denominator. Or you could divide and simplify the fraction. So if we are looking at this, and if you think about this, what is nice is you could write infinitely many fractions that are equivalent to 8/12. If you wanted to take both 8 and 12 and multiply them by 2, if you did that, we would end up with 16/24. That would be equivalent to 8/12. You could have taken 8/12 and divided it both by 4 in both the numerator and denominator, and you would have had 2/3. You could take 8/12 and multiply both by 10, which would give us 80/120. And you could actually multiply by any factor or any number to get an equivalent fraction. When we simplify our variable expressions, this is going to be your second example that you're going to write right below that last one. So please make sure you have that last example written down. Example 2, simplify variable expressions. If we write down 6x squared and 12xy, so if we're going to follow our rules said that we would write out our factors. So 2 times 3 is 6 times x times x. In our denominator, 12, some of you might be thinking 6 times 2 or 2 times 2 times 3, and then x and y. What do they have in common? Well, at first notice, they both have 2 in common, so I replace it with 1/1. If I'm looking at the rest of mine, and I probably would do this right up in this problem right here, where I replace it with 1/1. The other thing I notice is that they both have an x. I can replace that with 1/1. They both have a 3. I can replace it with 1/1 as I simplify that. So now in my numerator, I have 1 times 1 times 1 times x, which is simply going to give me x, or 1x. In my denominator, I have 1 times 2 times 1, which will give me 2. I do no longer have an x, but I have a y. And so my simplified fraction is going to be x over 2y, or 1x over 2y. We are now going to try it with these next ones. As you are looking at the problem, writing it out as prime factors first, and then simplifying. So if you are going to simplify this, you would notice that you have common factors. Your common factors, as you look at this, you have 2's in common. 2 over 2 is the same as 1. X over x is the same as 1. You are left with 2y divided by 3. So now we're looking at 32xy. And one thing I noticed about 8 and 32 is that 8 is equal to, as I was saying, I got interrupted by my children. As I simplify this, I notice that 32 is actually just going to be 8 times 4, and then I have an x, divided by 8x and y. So instead of writing it all out as prime factors, I might notice this, and the 8 over 8 is the same as 1. The x's are going to cancel as 1 over 1, and I'm left with 4 divided by y. It is your turn to try this next one. 5x squared y divided by 10xy, and 2x to the third y divided by 6x squared. Try those two as you finish up, and so that we can look at how you're going to look at those answers in class tomorrow. The other thing you're going to be asked to do is sometimes simplify first and then evaluate. So again, we would look at this expression of negative 18x over 9x to the third. We can factor out of 18 a negative 1. The other factor I would look at is a 9 times 2. The reason 9 is that in our denominator I have 9. And then I would write my x factors of the 3 x's, and in my numerator I have the 1x. So if I'm looking at this, instead of, we're going to kind of ignore all of this going down, if I look at simplifying this, 9 over 9 becomes 1 over 1. X over x becomes 1 over 1, and my solution in the numerator is a negative 1 times 2, which is negative 2, divided by, in my denominator, x times x, or x squared. So I have negative 2 over x squared. What they're asking us to do next is evaluate when x equals 2. So since I now have negative 2 over x squared, that is equal to negative 2, and I'm going to replace the x with a 2 and square it, which gives me negative 2 divided by 4, which would evaluate to a negative 1/2. Remember, evaluate just means plug in that value and find what it's equal. But we'll be simplifying first. I would like you now on the next page to try these 4 questions, simplifying them, and then in class we will look at those tomorrow. Hopefully this is making sense, that you're finding your common factors and canceling them. But again, we'll look at these tomorrow in class before we start your assignment.